In this session, we'll talk about how to handle changes in a procurement contract. Procurement contract establish the foundation for suppliers' relationships and project deliverables. However, unforeseen changes can be necessitate it can necessitate the contract modifications, whether whether due a scope adjustment or regulatory compliance or risk management. It's crucial to handle these contract changes systematically and transparently to avoid dispute and cost overruns. First, let's understand what are the common reasons behind procurement contract changes. First, you have scope changes. Scope changes can be changes in project requirements or deliverables or functionality. Next, we have regulatory and legal adjustment, and these can come or can be, for example, compliance with the new laws or industry standards or safety regulations. The third reason here we have is vendor performance issue, and vendor performance issue includes delays or quality concerns or failure to meet the contractual obligations. Fourth reason here we have is market and economic conditions. By, let's say, for example, there's price fluctuations or raw material shortages or inflation affecting the procurement. Here, one of these reasons which can these contract change. We also have one of these important reasons where risk management adjustment. It's by adjusting the contracts due, let's say, supply chain disruptions or unforeseen risks. These several factors can trigger the procurement contract changes. So understanding these drivers, it helps the organizations to proactively manage the contract risks and maintain procurement efficiency. Let's see now how we can, let's say, manage one of these contract amendments. It's a step-by-step approach here we're gonna follow. First, you need to identify the need for change. Again, as we've mentioned and we've looked into these previous reasons where the contract amendments is happening due one, two, three, four reason. Now it's the time to implement these. And again, first is to identify the need of change. Assess by assessing why the contract requires a modification. As we discussed, is it related to the scope changes? Is it related to the cost? Is it related to the risk? Is it due on economic changes or schedule or compliance risks? So first, you need to identify the need of change by assessing the let's say why the contract requires the modification. Next, you need to evaluate the impact. So by analyzing how the change can affect the project timelines, budget, and performance, you can evaluate the impact of these changes to let's say or contract amendment. Next, you need to initiate a change request. And initiating a change request is a by formalizing the change through contract modification procedures. Fourth step here you can follow is negotiate and approve the amendment by engaging with the stakeholders and finalizing the terms before official approval. The fifth step here is that you need, after you obtain the approval from these stakeholders to do the change in amendment of the contract, you need to implement and document the change by updating the procurement records and the project schedules and budget. Lastly, you need to monitor the compliance by ensuring the vendors and teams adheres to the revised contract terms and conditions. So handling the contract amendments requires a systematic approach that ensures the project teams and vendors understand, evaluate, assess, approve, and implement and monitor the changes effectively. This structured, let's say, approach or process, it minimizes the risk, prevents cost overruns, and maintain project alignment. So these are the key components of any change requests we already have discussed, which is the reason behind of the change, impact analysis to assess the impact, the post solution or the corrective action, and the stakeholder, let's say, approval. And finally, after you implement that change and you document it, you need to also monitor that change in order to ensure that change request is implemented correctly. What are the risks in contract modification and how to mitigate them? Contract changes introduces potential risks, including, let's say, dispute or cost impact or delays. By implementing a strict risk mitigation strategies such as clear negotiation frameworks and compliance reviews, the organizations can ensure smooth procurement and contract modifications. Some of these procurement risks, which we already have discovered, including the dispute over the contract terms, and to mitigate such risks, you can conduct throughout a stakeholder or through stakeholder discussions and legal reviews. You can mitigate the risk of having a dispute over the contract terms. The next risk here we have is to deal with cost overruns due changes. So remember when we say that there is a change that need to be implemented and we assess the change and we found that it needs or it could impact the cost on the project. So this is cost overruns due to the changes. And by performing an well assessed impact analysis before approving any amendments, you can understand and set a contingency reserve to these cost overruns. The next procurement risk we have here is delays from renegotiation. And to mitigate such risks is by establishing a clear change request procedures. We also have regulatory with non-compliance. So how to mitigate such non-compliance with these risks or regulatory non-compliance risks? It's by engaging the legal advisors in contract modifications. Finally, we have some of the supplier resistance where you need to align as a mitigation strategy, you need to align the changes with mutually benefit terms. Now let's look at one of these best practices for contract change management. First, you need to start with maintaining a clear documentation for all of the contract amendments. You also need to use a formal change control procedures for procurement modifications. One of also these best practices is to keep the stakeholder engaged early to ensure the buy-in and smooth implementation. You also need to monitor the vendor compliance, post any of these changes and post any of these contract amendments, post the modification of these contracts. You need to ensure that the vendor is post modification to prevent any performance gaps, and you need to ensure that, let's say, the vendor or the supplier has implemented these changes. Finally, you need to implement the lessons learned to refine the future contract management strategies. Following these best practices in contract change management ensures the transparency, efficiency, and compliance. And by maintaining the documentation and engaging the stakeholders and monitoring the vendor adherence, the organizations can mitigate these risks and enhances the procurement success or process success. And here are the stakeholder roles and contract changes. So the first stakeholder, which is the project manager, and the role in procurement contract modification is the project manager here need to ensure that the contract changes align with the project objectives. The procurement team needs to manage the contract modifications and vendor coordination. When it comes to finance team, the finance team need to assess the cost implication and budget alignment. The legal advisors need to ensure the contract amendments to comply with the rules and regulations of the, say, of the organization, of the country, of the, say, let's say, whether the company is international or not. So you need to comply with all of these by involving the legal advisors. Finally, we have the vendors or suppliers. And vendor and suppliers, their role here is to negotiate and implement the approved contract changes. And you, as a project manager, you need to ensure that these changes already implemented and monitor them to ensure that the vendors and suppliers are implementing these amendments. So contract changes requires multi-stakeholder collaboration to ensure the procurement alignment and financial stability or visibility and legal compliance. By clearly defining the stakeholder responsibilities, it enhances the efficiency in handling the contract modifications. What are these technology and digital tools that can be used in contract change management? So, these technology enables or tools includes the contract lifecycle, which is the CLM system to automate the contract tracking. We already have also talked about e-signatures and digital approvals to streamline the contract modifications. Blockchain-based contract, which is very effective in terms of security and transparency. AI-driven contract analysis to identify the risk areas in any proposed amendments. So these digital tools enhances the procurement and contract management by improving the efficiency, security, and compliance. AI and blockchain and automated contract tracking systems help to streamline the modifications and also minimizes the risks. And to summarize our session on handling the procurement contract changes, we talked about the contract modification, which must be structured, documented, assessed, approved, and legally compliant. We also talked about effective change control to ensure the transparency and minimize the disputes. We have already also touched the one of these important aspects of having a stakeholder collaboration, which is essential for successful contract amendments. Finally, we talked about the technology enablers to enhance the contract tracking and risk mitigation to ensure that you have a well, let's say, effective procurement contract changes.